You're one of the only people that can really
That
talk
never
about what
made any
really
money in the
happened.
.com.
Many people in this generation, I believe, or the new founders, don't really know what the .com boom felt like.
Yeah. It was clear there was something very different here. Suddenly, everything was possible. Sometimes one might argue that these are vitamins and not really aspirins that they're solving, but that's okay. That is the ecosystem.
Ketera was a very interesting company. I think 15 startups emerged from the first 30 employees.
Yes. We just said the philosophy of hiring has got to be that nobody will ever pass our interview. So we keep asking more and more and more questions till somebody fails the question, and we just see how high did they go.
Oh wow, it's almost like a game.
We had a pop-up that said "Welcome to mChek on Airtel."
Oh, I remember this now. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
okay.
everybody who I talk about that curses me, say you were the guy responsible for that. Enrollment in Aadhaar, 1.4 billion in 6 years. That is Singapore every week for 6 years in a row.
Yeah.
Right? It's Australia every month. It's the US every year. That's the scale we're talking about, right?
Welcome to another episode of Damani Talks. Today we have somebody who has been at the forefront of innovation, entrepreneurship, and most importantly, venture capital. He's been someone who's had a storied career starting out in India, then moving on to the Silicon Valley. He's come back to India, and after that, he's also gone on to set up what is one of the most respected venture capital firms in India, Prime Venture Partners. So, without further ado, I would love to welcome the managing partner at Prime Venture Partners, Sanjay Swamy. Sanjay, welcome to the Money Talks.
Thanks, Anirudh. It's great to be here. I guess I learned a few things about myself already in the show, but you're too kind. But I've had through serendipity, luck, and a lot of mistakes. The opportunity to be part of some of these programs. Saying I had an important role to play perhaps is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think every one of these has been a learning opportunity. And it's really just been a privilege to be part of this ecosystem here in India and, contribute and benefit from it in many different ways. So thanks for having me here.
I know you're being very, very humble, Sanjay, because each one of these initiatives that we're talking about has literally transformed the lives of 1.4 billion people and literally put India at the forefront of innovation, especially when it comes to financial inclusion. So, but I really want to go back to the start, right? As the format is at the Money Talks, we really want to know the man or the why behind the whatever you're doing today. And I believe you started out in Bangalore, right? You went to St. Joseph's, and you didn't really have any plans to be in the venture management space.
Oh, yeah. Growing up, I wasn't born into a family with the last name Money, although several South Indians are. So self-made, my dad was in the Air Force, got the Ati Vishesh Seva Medal from the President of India.
Wow.
Was GM HAL Aircraft Division. So had really good, I would say middle class, upper middle class upbringing, but still very much focused on, building a career through hard work and discipline. I grew up not too far from this studio where we are in Indranagar. I'm perhaps one of the earlier Indranagar ka gunda, as they call me, as they would call it. Grew up literally around here. I spent actually the first 10 years in Orissa, where dad helped set up the MiG engine factory, then moved to Bangalore. And in Bangalore, yes, I did go to St. Joseph's Boys High School. Grew up in Indranagar, played. I can claim to be one of Rahul Dravid's early coaches, but he was a terrible student and didn't listen to anything I said. Thankfully, I guess. So played cricket. He used to be 6 years old. We'd play evening cricket, and he would say, "I want last man batting. I want to become Gavaskar," and we could never get him out. This kid was a real menace for all of us. But grew up here, rode my bicycle to school every day, used to come home for lunch. You could ride your bike in 12 minutes in Bangalore. It's just all unthinkable things now. Had a great time in school. I used to be a sprint champion then. I think I can still outrun any 60-year-old. But this time it has to be a 5-meter run, not a 100-meter run. And, just a simple, couple of sisters. And my mom is a big pillar, has continued to be a very strong support for us.
And you found yourself, you found your way to Silicon Valley in 1992. right? And this is when Silicon Valley really was trying to take off
Yes.
at that point.
So did just finishing up the story, did my schooling and undergrad here in Bangalore
Acha.
at University College of Engineering. I went to France for a couple of years, got a fellowship to do a master's in flight control systems,
Okay.
which nowadays when they say buckle up, I do buckle up on the plane, and I know that it can be quite turbulent. Um, wrote and written and defended a thesis in French. Um, Studying in the foreign language is always very interesting because if you do well, it's despite the language. If you don't do well, it's of course because of the language. So it's a great alibi. Then lived in University of Washington, Seattle for about 3 years. I went to study there.
Okay.
And then lived and worked in Silicon Valley from 92 onwards and was there from 92 to 2003.
Yeah.
And then I saw something exciting happening in India and I decided to move back to India.
So you were at Integrated Systems at the
Correct.
time for about 7 years.
Yeah, so that was actually the startup of Dr. Naren Gupta, who sadly is no more, the founder of Nexus Venture Partners. And I got to work actually very closely with him in his startup and learned a lot. I did everything from sales, marketing, engineering, international sales because I spoke French.
Correct.
The European team would keep demanding that I come there and sell to customers. But it was an extraordinary experience because I did literally all departments except finance and HR. And then in hindsight, I wish I had done that also. But I got a very well-rounded experience of being in technical sales and marketing. And I almost feel like from the start of my career to today, my job has not changed. It's really, looking at all things tech and is just geeking out on it and uh, showcasing to others why this is the next greatest thing. But over the years, I've always been a people person. I've always enjoyed sales and marketing challenges.
And then you moved to Xerox.
Correct.
In 1999. What drove the decision to move out of something you've been with for 7 years?
Yeah.
And then move on to obviously.
So almost every decision has been made without a plan, serendipity and luck, as I said. So one of my colleagues had moved there. And I was watching, from the sidelines in Silicon Valley because integrated systems was sort of an embedded software solutions play, selling in the aerospace, automotive industries. But the dot-com era was happening and Xerox was building digital rights management technology, which at the time was seen as something very, very important because the world was perceived as being an unconnected world, right? For some time, we were not thinking about being always connected. And so content in particular, if it had to be consumed, whether it was music or books or whatever, needed to have some security built in. And Xerox had some very deep IP there. So I got a marketing role in that and at Xerox Park. So I always say I was the only marketing guy in Xerox Park. Everybody else was sort of more of a technologist and a scientist. And Park, for those who don't know, is the Palo Alto Research Center, where pretty much every invention from the Windows operating system, not Windows, but the Windows-based, compute to the mouse to Ethernet to everything was discovered there. Although other companies monetized it, right? Xerox probably did not. And it was a great opportunity to be there. The product we were working on got spun out in a joint venture with Microsoft. I got to meet the Xerox CEO as well as Steve Ballmer, who was the Microsoft CEO. I told my wife when I came home, I shook hands with Steve Ballmer. I'm not washing my hands for a few days. Hopefully there's some, gold dust that will rub off. Sadly, none of that happened. But, every opportunity was always sort of doing something new. And that exposure was really helpful. And I got to the first contract I ever wrote was this spin out of a company in a joint venture and was like a 70-page contract. And people told me, you've seen everything there is to see in a legal agreement in your first agreement itself. So that was sort of the early days. And I then worked at a company called Portal Software in the telecom billing space, again, doing selling billing software for content. Very interesting experience. I joined the company when the stock price was $40. I left 2 years later when it was 40 cents. So I never made, I never had any luck.
That literally was my next question because I was thinking, while all these companies have survived and, obviously Xerox still exists even today, but then you got swept up in some way by the whole dot-com boom, and you're one of the only people that can really talk about what really happened.
Never made any money in the dot-com boom.
But many people in this generation, I believe, or the new founders, don't really know what the dot-com boom felt like. I was 15 or 16 years old. I was in the Indian markets looking at some of these, you could just change the name of your company into something tech or something soft. right? And so, or, which meant software, and then you would just see the stock price boom. I mean, I believe there was one company which was even in manufacturing, and it had a shutdown factory, just changed the name to something software,
Yep.
right? And the stock price was an upper circuits. But you were literally in the middle of it,
Yeah, we
watching.
used to, I would say every weekend, there would be all kinds of, business plan building that would happen, ideas like enothing.com where, I would you give me 98 cents, I'll give you $1. And then the next year you give me 99 cents and I'll give you $1. And we can claim that we're having improving margins, right? So we used to brainstorm all these, funky ideas. And some of them really translated into companies with, with advertising business models and stuff. But it was clear there was something very different here. Suddenly, everything was possible, right?
Yep.
And I think part of my later motivation for coming back to India, and I'll come back to that later, was we were seeing a second opportunity of the same thing happening through the mobile internet, right?
Yep.
But what we had seen firsthand, everything about shopping on the internet was new. Amazon did not exist at the time; they were also starting out at the same time, searching for information. Google was probably the 12th search engine that got funded, right? And to think that that's the only one
And
last
remember,
man standing.
these were the days of Netscape.
Yeah, Netscape, Yahoo, and there were companies that Yahoo wanted to buy Google for $1 billion, and they wanted like
I
200
don't even
million
know
more
how
or
many
something
people
like
remember ICQ used to be the first chat
that.
program, right?
Yes. AOL,
Yeah.
right? AOL, I remember, was such a large company, 35 million subscribers. They actually bought the portal billing system, and so got to experience how they think. Their call center was a profit center. So if you call to cancel, they were authorized to give you whatever 140 hours, 400 hours, all kinds of random numbers of free browsing.
Yep.
And they would never let you cancel, right? And every company was built around saying, look, just hold on to this customer at whatever cost, because the incremental CAC is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And once they're on board, the incremental cost of supporting this customer is near zero, but don't lose the customer, right? And so we saw, lot of new things being experimented with. eBay came out at that time, and one of my close friends was, I think, one of the first 10 engineers at eBay.
Wow.
Obviously, has done very well for himself financially. But people were just joining it because it seemed like fun, and you wanted to go there. That's the first time people would talk about offices with with beds there, so that people would work through 72-hour sprints at the same time.
Office Space was a movie made around that.
Yes, right. So I got to see some of that happening with friends, and almost very few of them really did well.
You were literally very young in your career, but it must have felt like this was going to be just this insane thing that's going to change trajectories forever.
Oh, absolutely. I think that certainly was there. And I think there was a belief. And that's where Silicon Valley, I think, is so special. And now we're talking about the AI boom. And before that, we had the mobile internet and the SaaS boom and things like that, or cloud. I think Silicon Valley certainly keeps finding a way to reinvent itself, right? And we do try to have some of that gene in HSR and in Ranagar and things like that here. But it is definitely still, very unique and very special. And I think the amazing thing there is they are unruffled by failure. They will make stupid mistakes. They'll take very bold bets, like a company like Theranos, for example, right, where there was, unfortunately, some fraud and things like that happened. Yeah, okay, fine. Let's move on to the next one, right?
Correct.
I mean, so that thing, I was talking to people in the US saying, how could such a thing happen? And most people say, well, if this had happened in another city in the US, it would have crippled the startup ecosystem. But Silicon Valley just brushes it off and says, okay, let's move on to the next thing. So there's and for the most part, I think people are just trying to solve problems in the manner that where tech can make a solution happen. Sometimes one might argue that these are vitamins and not really aspirins that they're solving, but that's okay. That is the ecosystem. And
they're required,
many a consumer wants a vitamin anyways, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's also beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So if you're passionate about something, you can pursue your dreams. And that is, I think, something that stuck with me, that, not everything needs to make sense, right? Some of this is
right away
very emotional. Also from a buyer perspective. It has to make them feel good and better about themselves. And I think that's what entrepreneurship is all about, right? It's something that you're passionate about that makes the world a better place for others. And whether it is solving their real problems or just making them feel better, making them better versions of themselves.
But Sanjay, was that your first time you saw some like an ecosystem at that time just collapse? Because at that time it felt like Silicon Valley was done. And I'm talking from a perspective. I went to the US when I was 18, right? So 2001. And this was just when the dot-com era had just collapsed, and everything just seemed like, oh my God, this is over. But we were investing in people or companies that were valuing themselves on eyeballs and clicks.
Hmm.
But at that time felt like, oh, this is just the way to value things, right? And
Yeah.
and I believe, again, we've both been investing for a while, but in your case, that we keep trying to reinvent the way to value companies, right? Again, if you go back to 22, 23, there was new metrics of how to value companies, which was like how fast can you burn, right? And you can be valued faster because of it. But Prime and
Certainly
and
21. Yeah.
yeah, felt has been one of those that I said, no, this kind of stuff does not happen. Is Was there any impact on your strategy today because of what you saw very early in your career, right? In 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001.
Yeah. Actually, I think a lot of our life is just a collection of our experiences and learnings from that, right? So even if I backtrack a little bit, to 92 when I was
Hmm.
job hunting, I was married, and my wife couldn't work in the US, and we were literally down to a couple of $100 in the bank when I
Wow.
got lucky and found a job, right? And after that, the life changed. Then I saw this crazy thing from the sidelines in Silicon Valley, and I
Yeah.
came to Xerox PARC and then to Portal and experienced a bit of it. But that was about the tail end of it, where the market just imploded because of 9/11. Actually, September 10th, I flew Boston to San Francisco nonstop on the 8 a.m. United flight. So with my wife, actually, we had gone for a weekend,
Oh my
and the
God.
next morning, the
Yeah.
same flights were involved, and the world changed. But I think that was a change that nobody could have fathomed, right? It was one of those black swan events, almost sort of like COVID, except that this was localized.
Yeah.
And I think these moments do occur from time to time, and they're like complete resets, and they force you to rethink all the assumptions and bring you down to earth pretty fast. But sometimes you have to also be in the moment, right? And that's where serendipity and luck also play a role. So yeah, in the long run, they're all dead. So yeah, in the long run, the only thing that matters is for startups is a discounted cash flow and things like that. But that could be a good 15 years out, or 15 minutes out, and you don't know that,
Right.
right? And you just have to make sort of this is so much of business of judgment, whether you're an entrepreneur or, I mean, I still see myself as an entrepreneur, right? My startup is my VC fund.
True.
But I think we're continuously course correcting, and I think this is also one of those industries where every time you think you figured it out, you get humbled very, very fast. So I think it's also important to not take yourself too seriously. Some of this there is a method to the madness. Sometimes there is really more madness than method.
Method. So
And both
true.
are fine,
Yeah.
because ultimately the opportunities come every now and then.
Yeah.
Right.
And around this time, when I think the whole
.com era.
dot-com era was sort of imploding, you came to India and you
Mhm.
saw something. So I think 2002, 2003. At that time, it was a dream to be in the US
Yep.
and to get that, the green card and then become a citizen. And you did the reverse. You were maybe one of the first people to do a reverse brain drain, maybe at the very early part of 2000s, right? When most people wanted to go to the US, you actually moved back. What happened?
So a couple of things. On the not so pleasant front, I mean, actually, we had built a house in the Bay Area, right? We were probably at the time probably one of the first few Indian origin folks that bought an old house, demolished it, built a brand new house from scratch. It was like the dream home. Everything was designed to plan, etc. And then I got laid off, right? So 2002 was a very tough time, and my wife had quit her job thinking I had a good job, and she wanted to take some time off and be with our son that she had not spent much time with. And so here we were, two of us with $1 million mortgage and no income. So second time in life now, we just thought we had, solved this, sub $1,000 net worth. And now not only was that, there was $1 million mortgage on our heads as well, right? Which today people will laugh because the pricing in Silicon Valley is much, much crazier. But, it was a lot of money. And it still is a lot
It's
of
still,
money,
yeah, it's
right?
still a lot of money. $1 million is $1 million.
I always, when we bought the house, I told my wife, we're now $2 million short of calling ourselves millionaires because negative one to start with. But yeah, I said, okay, what do you do next? I said, well, it's not like I'm going to be able to find a job. Silicon Valley is like very tough it was going through very tough times. I said, okay, how about we do a startup? So we tried doing a startup, didn't get anywhere. But Then somebody came and fortuitously said, "Oh, we're willing to rent your house." So, oh, great, and the rent was enough to cover
The mortgage.
the mortgage, the property tax, the insurance, and leave us with a little bit of money. So I said, let's go back to India, and this money we can live for some time and see what's happening here. So as I came back, one of the funny things that happened was I remember even the location in RT Nagar. I met an auto rickshaw driver. I mean, I took an auto and I asked him, time kya hua? Time kya hai? And he pulled out his cell phone to read out the time to me. Right? I said, holy cow, he's got something in his hand here that he can get a message to. And that sort of was the aha moment for me, thinking that we could do peer-to-peer payments. I'm talking 2003.
Hmm.
And PayPal had become a big thing in the US at the
Yep.
time, or starting to become. I said, oh, I could create a mobile version of PayPal, but it has to be for India because these people are all dealing in cash. And um, quickly, went back to the US. We had rented the house, but we're not sure if we're going to move to India, right?
Hmm.
So came back, pulled all the stuff out of public storage, shipped it to India, and landed in Bangalore in a couple of months. This is I'm talking 2003.
Wow.
And, never made any decision of is this for good. People would ask me, is this for good? I'd say, I hope it's for my good, but I have no idea if this is permanent or not. And I think I looked at it saying, look, I'm just going back home. It can't be that difficult. Worst case,
Correct.
if it doesn't work out, we'll come back. And I think that helped us with the soft landing
Hmm.
because everybody sort of overthinks these things. And maybe that's the right thing to do. But when you overthink, you start looking at all the things that are not working out, right? So you can come to India and complain about the physical infrastructure, or you can come to India and appreciate that the masala dosa is 10 rupees, right? And or in the US, you can appreciate the physical infrastructure, or you can say, oh my God, it's $20 for a dosa.
Yeah.
I could get 10 of these in India, right? Or 20 of these. So I've always believed in appreciating where I am and what I like about the place, and hope generally I always tell my wife, look, 40% of life is common. 30% of what you get here you don't get there. 30% what you get there you don't get here.
Yep.
When you're here, enjoy the right 30% and don't complain about the other 30. And if you're really hung up on that, then go back and enjoy that 30 and don't complain about this 30,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So broadly speaking, I don't think there's any perfect place to live, and that's also opportunity. So we came back, and then I found out there was this entity called RBI that controlled anything to do with money movement, and so I started digging into it. In the meantime, I took up a couple of stints, short stint at a company called M Portal that had actually worked on the original Reliance R World platform and built the whole thing actually for the earlier Arcom
Acha.
Reliance. And then subsequently worked with Ketera, which was being set up in India.
Ketera was a
And
very interesting company. I think 15 startups emerged from the first 30 employees.
yes. That was one of those, we just said the philosophy of hiring has got to be that nobody will ever pass our interview. So we keep asking more and more and more questions till somebody, fails the question, and we just see how high did they go
Oh wow, it's
in the
almost like a
stack.
game.
So exactly right. And so we built really an extraordinary team. There were a lot of people. The recruiter would call me and say, Amazon has given him a job. How can you reject him, right? And things like that. But I think what we did was we created like this extraordinary culture, which was very Silicon Valley-esque,
Hmm.
right? And I was a business guy building a dev team here, right? So I actually put an ad out in the newspaper and said, you could win this motorbike if you can, if you get a job with us.
Are you serious?
One person did actually win it, and that was Ashish Sinha, who runs Plugged In or
Okay.
Unplugged, and Plugged In, right? And I think he rebranded to Next Big What. But I did all the unconventional things. I had complete freedom to do unconventional things here, and basic things I found. The recruiting process were broken here in India, and when somebody comes to your office, even if they show up 15 minutes earlier, just meet them, treat them with a cup of coffee, etc. If an interview is not working out, even if it's 20 minutes into the interview process, just politely tell the candidate it's not going to work out here.
Yeah.
Don't waste their time. Don't put people through the ringer unless you're sure of it. Everybody has an absolute veto. My view is if you're in the interview committee, if I'm asking you to meet a startup, I value your opinion. Otherwise, why would I ask you to meet
Correct.
this company, right? So similar philosophy. And we built a team of real, I would say, band of pirates, so to speak. and we would challenge the US team toe to toe. And that was actually
What
the
was Ketera
culture.
doing, by the way?
Ketera was sort of building outsourced. So think of it as a cloud-based Ariba for you had Salesforce, which was doing what the CRM. This was doing procurement software.
Oh, I see.
Right, it was actually spun out of American Express to
Okay.
help companies analyze their spend and say, okay, if you have 17 people selling you stationery, maybe you should go down to 2 and you can get better contract. Right, so to analyze all of the spend. And so then that whole contract management piece, etc. A lot of which is suddenly again becoming exciting with the AI stuff, right?
Correct.
The writing of contracts and so on. So built that over 2 years, and then one day Rajesh Jain called me and said, I know you've been talking about this payments ideas. I'd been introduced to him. He's the real OG man in India, if there is ever one. And there's this company, it's very, very, very early stage. I'm just putting in a little bit of money, and DFJ is coming in. It's called mChek. Right? And they had done an initial launch with Airtel. And to me, mobile payments was absolutely going to happen. It was a question of when, it's not a question of if. Right?
Really?
And even in 2003, 2004, when I moved back originally with that, I had actually written papers around how the phone will be your ATM machine and things like that. And I dug up, actually, I had written a business plan for a company that I call 626 Pay, which on the mobile says M2M. For those who remember those, keypads and, with translating those codes to letters and words.
Very famous in the US, by the way,
yes,
right?
Even now, actually. Yeah. So when the opportunity came, I said, oh, this is interesting. So I was initially brought in as CEO, and in 4 months, the founder left, and I became the CEO of the company, which was interesting because
I think
I
you
had
started out as a COO
yes.
in that company. But it was a very different role for you because you were always on the marketing and sales side.
Yes,
and now you took a very deep operational.
Actually, it was so early that, basically the VCs wanted someone that they could sort of have and they could sort of relate to and understand, because Anurag is an amazing scientist, right? I mean, he would just come up with really crazy ideas, but turning it into a business, is another matter.
I know you said a very key word. VCs came in.
Yes,
I didn't know that VCs were around in 2005.
So that was that's when DFJ was there, actually, right?
But there must have been slim pickings. I don't
No,
think
they weren't in India as such.
Yeah.
They just, I think Tim Draper was here on a visit and he saw something he liked. He said, I'll fund it, right?
Yeah.
That's how it was at the time. I think Sequoia or Westbridge was there, and then later became Sequoia. And Axel, of course, was there at the time.
Not really an angel ecosystem. I mean, I don't remember there being really an angel ecosystem.
Very little. I had, by the way, I had done an angel investment in the first 2 years here. Company called Pick Square that got acquired by Infibeam, and ended up being a great outcome for me, right? So
this was an investment you made around
2004.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's really an OG kind of investment.
Actually, it was the best thing that happened to me with that was, of course, we did financially very well over 15 years after we thought this company would never give us any return. But more importantly, that's how I was introduced to my co-founder at Prime, Shripati, through the founder's professor, some weird network connection. And that's how we got to know each other. And I keep saying, yes, we did very well. But the biggest thing for me was I was connected to Shripati, and we had a lunch together. And he said, "Okay, you seem like a reasonable guy. If you're writing a check, I'll also write a check." Right? I mean, who knows what will happen later in life, right? I think this is a great example, actually, right? I mean, we just did something because it seemed like a good thing to do, help a couple of folks. We never looked at it and said, how big can this become, etc. It seemed that they would, flog hard and try to make us whole. And we were encouraging somebody. That literally was how we saw it. It turned out to be a great outcome for us and for them, of course. And,
And in fact, so early, I think 2004 is when you invested. I think it got acquired by Infibeam around...
that was about 6 years later. Yeah. But, Infibeam's IPO happened, I think, 2017 or something like that, right? Or 2015.
But the point being, like, you were actually seeing cycles of entry to exit. 2011 is when you started Prime. But by that time, you'd already got your first exit, at least on paper.
No. I went through another round of sub $1,000 net worth before all that happened, right? Okay. So mChek actually executed extraordinarily well on certain dimensions, but if we had to build like a 5-dimensional solution, we built a 4-dimensional with extraordinary execution, and one that we just couldn't pull off.
Okay.
And We were on every single Airtel SIM card, and we had a pop-up that said, "Welcome to mChek on Airtel."
Oh, I remember this now. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, okay.
everybody who I talk about that curses me, say, you were the guy responsible for that. But, we moved India from the 8K SIM card to the 64K SIM card in one shot, because Airtel had the courage to say, okay, this could be big and we'll invest in payments, right? And we were great partners at that time. But, regulatory wise, I had to get Airtel, I had to get the banks, I had to get a collection of banks, because consumers would not open the bank account just for this. And so we had to work through Visa, etc. And we really built the first version of Apple Pay in 2007. Um, and we were on 300 million Airtel SIM cards over time. Docomo put us on 100% of their SIM cards. But it was still a slightly fragmented market, very high churn market. Because people would buy a SIM card as a use and throw type of a thing, right? So by the time they've opened the bank account, the number is no longer valid. We did not have number portability in India.
At that time, yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
And so people would keep getting new numbers, right? So that was one big issue. KYC was a big issue at the time. And this is why I ended up working with the Aadhaar program as well. And the banking side was like even more broken from a KYC perspective.
And then you had this thing called the RBI that sit on.
And RBI was very particular about all these things. So I actually have written chapters of the first version of the 2008 mobile banking guidelines, right? Because RBI always looked at it and said, okay, people will lose their mobile phone. This can't be secure. But it is actually more secure than a laptop computer where you're going and typing in credit card details, because that can be accessed from anywhere in the world, whereas this is a physical device that, and it's network enabled. So if you lose it, you can turn it off. So those sort of nuances, took some time for the ecosystem to appreciate, right? And we were sort of, I think that's the difference between being caught on the leading edge versus the bleeding edge, right? Which unfortunately in entrepreneurship you'll only find out post facto.
Correct.
There is no way of saying this is the bleeding edge and not yet the leading edge, right? But extraordinary learning experience. Everything I learned about fintech, started there. The whole curiosity of it. But 2010, it was clear company was probably a generation too early. But I didn't know, was it 1 year too early or was it 10 years too early, right? True. And so I decided to move on. And
must have been a difficult decision, because when you had 300 million, which at that time was the population of the US, obviously not same value.
Maybe
customer.
About 10% of them had activated it. But just the key was we had to get them a bank account, and that was tough, right? But we still were doing 40, 50 lakhs a day of daily volume of recharges and bill payments.
Wow.
Which in the grand scheme of things was very small, but as a startup it was still quite extraordinary, right? If we could scale another 2 orders of magnitude, it would have been quite a big company. But about 6 months earlier, Nandan had been appointed as the chairman of UIDAI. And I had written a blog I just read yesterday actually on Medianama and Nikhil Pahwa's thing. And I wrote why the SIM card should be India's national ID card. Because the talk earlier was that Aadhaar would be a smart card based system. And a SIM card is a smart card in every which way, but it's also network connected.
True.
Right. So it's not just secure, you can also turn it off and stuff like that, which you can't do with a physical smart card. And somehow that got through to the UIDA team, and I got a call from them, and I had gone and chatted once with Nandan about it. And I was leaving mChek, and he said, well, if you have some time, even you can help, we'd love to have you help us with because you have these war stories from the field.
Yeah.
Of things that didn't work, right? I had not cracked what would work, but I knew several things that wouldn't work, right?
Which is sometimes more important.
Absolutely. And I was knowing what not to do. And so after I left mChek, I went and watched a movie once, and I called my wife in the middle of the movie. I said, I'm watching a movie in the middle of the day. And she said, what do I care? Right? And I said, even my wife doesn't care. I better go back to doing something useful. And so then I reached out to the UIDA team, and then, of course, joined them for about a little over 18 months.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, Shripati and Bala, who was also our first partner before Amit Somani came, they were also talking to Nandan in parallel, and we had become good friends. They'd also just moved back to India, and we were in the same gated community. A lot of, life is full of these sort of intertwined moments that keep coming back. And so I said, oh, okay, yeah, I'm also talking about the same sort of a role. And so three of us ended up working on the UIDAI project, along with some real extraordinary people that Nandan had assembled, both the civil servant side, the government guys, and like people like Ram Sevak Sharma, who later became the MeitY head and was really responsible for the extraordinary distribution of the vaccine during the pandemic, came out of retirement, right? And I got to work very closely with such people. It actually, growing up in the private sector, you have a very cynical view of the government, right? It's always, we always say, oh, yeah, whatever we do, it's despite the government, when you don't really need the support of the government for day-to-day stuff, right? You can be very cynical about it. But when you work on this program, you realize, look, as a startup, you say, what's your target group, ICP, this, that, all these things. But for the government, you have to support, right? Aadhaar was designed as a biometric ID. Everybody had to take a, name, address, date of birth, gender, phone number, email address, photograph, all 10 fingerprints, 2 iris scans. Country of 1.2, 1.4 billion people, there'll be somebody who doesn't have fingerprints, doesn't have eyes, right? As a startup, you say, that's not my customer.
Yeah.
But as a government, you can't say that. You have to find a solution for 100%. There is no,
You can't leave anybody out.
can't leave anybody behind, right? So the challenges and the way you have to solve a problem and at government scale and rolling out a physical identity enrollment program over the course of 5 to 6 years at that scale. I don't know if you realize enrollment in Aadhaar, 1.4 billion in 6 years, that is Singapore every week for 6 years in a row.
Yeah.
Right? It's Australia every month, it's the US every year. That's the scale we're talking about, right? And doing it at under $1 an enrollment or in 50 rupees per enrollment was the
In
fee.
fact, I one of the things that I found out, that in villages, people actually don't even know their birth date.
Yeah. But
So you might have an entire village that only has the same birth date, which is 1st of January of some year.
Yeah.
Which
people will come and say, हाँ हमारा जन्मदिन was, there was a fire और उसके 2 साल बाद में मेरा जन्म हुआ था, right? So you go back and check all of those things. The postal department's PIN code system was sort of fairly average. So we had to cleanse that entire data and give it back to them. And so folks like Pramod Verma and Shrikant Muni and Sanjay Jain are like absolute rock star. Shankar Marwada, who did the whole branding and messaging around this. And we had this small team of about 15, 20 of us working alongside the government, right? But ultimately, it was a government program, right? So you can't be very visible. You have to just really help educate and make sure that the right things were done. We had also learned.
I also realized you were sort of a volunteer at UIDAI.
Yes, that was the official title. Volunteer authentication and applications or something like that was my title. I had an official letter, which I recently dug up again, right? And it was pro bono. Some expenses were paid for, but broadly it was, because the nation building opportunity. I always tell people I made the least amount of money then, but it was the most enriching phase of my life, right? And extraordinary exposure, right? I mean, got to go to the RBI governor's office and, show what we had done. I built all the examples of, eKYC and stuff like that, in the very, very early days. So I would go and, demonstrate to them, to TRAI chairman. At the time, it was the previous government, Sam Petroda and Nandan and a few other folks sort of explaining what this thing is, then go to Montek Singh Ahluwalia's office and talk to them about how this could change India. I think one thing was very clear is whether this was the perfect platform or not, it was a necessity, right? There was so many leakages that could be solved. But to me, and my probably biggest focus area and contribution was really bringing the mobile as a core part of the strategy, because it was initially not expected to be. In fact, the original document, and even now, it'll say phone number. It doesn't say mobile number, right? Because India still had sub 50 million mobile phone users. But
and
I had
was very difficult at that time.
in mChek, because the mobile had a lot of churn, that they were not enrolling 1.8 million per month as they were saying. Those are the net additions. The gross additions were like 50 million. So they were doing 50 million KYCs a month, right? But because of the churn, it seemed like it was a small number.
And people were okay with letting their phone numbers go.
Yes, at the time. Yeah. But we knew that by that time, number portability and stuff was coming in, or it had already come in. And for the telcos, the KYC was becoming mandatory because there had been some of these incidents where people were triggering devices by SIM cards and stuff. So India became a lot more strict about KYC. So that was a perfect opportunity to say, hey, we have got a government approved KYC, which is all digital, right? And kudos to Geo for having launched with that, and they never had a piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually spent a lot of time, even post the Aadhaar days. We had started. I'll come back to all the startups, working with iSpirit as a very active volunteer. And to this day, even for 2 months ago, I was invited to speak at some event about Prime, and I said, "Yeah, I'll talk 2 slides about Prime, but let me tell you what's happening in India." And the scale at which we have digitized the country, and it's mind blowing. I pulled up some of the latest numbers and stats to prepare for that deck. You just can't fathom what's happening here. Right? The
Yeah.
scale of Aadhaar authentications that are going on. Of course, UPI is like the poster child now for India.
And
It's the
I don't
envy
think
of
UPI
everyone.
was possible without an Aadhaar
Yeah, because
behind.
Aadhaar was key to bring everybody into the banking
Correct.
system, right? So the jam trinity of Jandan, Aadhaar, and mobile
Yeah.
was critical. And once those three came together, the layer of, I mean, that's basically what we all live for as entrepreneurs and VCs this day in India, right? That's just infinite opportunity, because this is sort of as they say, Akshay Patra, right? It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Once it's there, there's so much more one can do, right? And I think now with all the explosion of data that has happened, and the whole AI and data science stuff that is maturing now, I think it's going to be a whole new wave of
Did you really think that
personalized services.
because initially Aadhaar had a lot of political opposition also, right? Because obviously all these leakages was helping some people, and again we're not getting political here. But did you ever think, with all the pushback that Aadhaar received, right, that it was actually going to get 1.4 billion people enrolled?
Never a doubt.
Okay.
Never a doubt. In the early days, you have to dream.
Yeah.
If you don't dream, then why get into it? But I have to say, Nandan is just such an extraordinary, unique person, right? He always will open the conversation. Okay, how do we okay, pilot? We should get to 200 million people in the pilot, right? What are you talking about? We were supposed to do 200,000 people, right? But he wouldn't think about anything small at all. And I think that you know the sort of personality he has of making things look very simple is a lesson for every entrepreneur, because ideas that sound simple means that you've seen all the complexity and addressed them, right? And his ability to think through all of those complexities and simplify the messaging, right, was what was critical, right? So and he's done that many more times, right? So we've seen that happen, including with UPI and stuff like that. But some people see the future, and I think he's one of them, right? And
No, I
we
mean,
were
it's
really, I think, fortunate and blessed as a country that he stepped out of Infosys to do this, because it changed the trajectory of a population
absolutely.
and perhaps global.
I think it, to me, when I had to go to the US and I make presentations, I said, that you're talking about Clear, and they have their own system. I said, we created DigiYatra,
Yeah.
and people are showing up at the airport without anything in hand, and they can just walk in. And in the new airport, the new Mumbai airport, at least what I've heard is that you will be able. There is no requirement for you to
Yeah.
even
You don't have to pull the QR code out
at all.
You just stand
Right?
there and it. Yeah, I
All
did
the
that
way till
last
you
week.
even get onto the flight.
Yes.
I mean, that changes complete trajectory. Look at the amount of paper being printed that gets there's tossed away. Everything goes away.
During the Aadhaar days, right? And I can talk about this for 2 hours.
But
So
I'm
the one of the things I was doing was the ROI on electronic KYC, right? And I said, look, telcos are doing 50 million SIM cards a month, right?
Right.
Which is 1.5 million a day. Which is, when I snap my fingers, 25 happened, right? Somewhere in the country,
Yeah.
right? That's astounding to think about it that way, right? My God, when you snap your fingers, 25 people got a SIM card. But not only did they get a SIM card, they just spent 200 sheets of paper between them, right? And a tree gives you 80,000 sheets. We're talking 1,000 trees a day, otherwise known as 1,000,000 trees in 3 years, right? Try planting 1,000,000 trees.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to take you 50 years to bring like full-grown trees, right? So I actually used to say the ROI on Aadhaar will completely be addressed through telecom KYC and the environmental benefits from it, right? So of course, you know, everybody looked at it as direct benefit transfer in the government leakages and stuff like that. But every which way you look at it, it has transformed things
I
for
don't
the
think we
country.
ever thought of that at all. Even for example, opening up a bank account now,
Yep.
yeah, or opening up something like a Zerodha account or something like that. It's
Yes.
all paperless.
Completely right.
Uh,
But that it used to be 10 sheets of paper.
More than that, I mean, for me, I remember opening up my first bank account because unfortunately my passport was renewed in Houston the last time, and then they said, "Well, you don't really have any KYC
Yeah.
in India. How do you prove you live at the address you live at?"
But just think about this, Anirudh, right? Your background, your family background, your education, right? But think of somebody who had none of that.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have any documents at all, right? I mean, anybody will vouch for you and say, "Oh, I know Anirudh Damani, give him a bank account," right? But that's not going to happen for them, right? And today, it has leveled the playing field so much. To give you a couple more examples, opening a brokerage account would be about 1,500 rupees of KYC
Absolutely.
expense, right? Now, at a 0.5% commission to the agent, if you save 3 lakh rupees, right, like about $4,000 for the international audiences, this thing, that will recover the KYC cost and the distribution cost, right? That 0.5%. Now, it's enter an Aadhaar number, get an OTP, click OK, right? So, sorry, just to cover so now you need to save 3 lakh rupees for it to make sense to get you into my system as a brokerage house, right? But now with Aadhaar, costs nothing.
Yeah.
Right? The variable cost for the government is like in the Naya Paisa or fraction of Naya Paisa to authenticate you. And so if I can save 10,000 rupees a year, I'm still a valuable customer, because
Yeah.
I'm not adding more cost to the service provider, right? So now you think how many people can come into the system.
Correct.
Right? And that's the inclusion that has happened, right? There's another study I saw, there's a chart I'm happy to share with you from the iSprit guys, that shows that the onboarding into the banking system that we did in India between 2011 and 2018, because we went from below Mexico to above China,
Yeah.
right, in terms of
Wow.
banking inclusion in 7 years. That is 45 years of GDP improvement,
Yeah.
GDP progress, right? Now, of course, we have not had that part happen yet, but it's not going to take us 45 years.
But the
It's going
infra
to
is
take
there,
us
right?
10
The
years.
important was the infra.
Because everybody's included.
Correct.
Right. So I think, we can go on and on, but I think we're just getting started now, because the first wave of startup opportunity, government opportunity of digitization, etc., whether it was bringing businesses into the GST mandate, whether it was, bringing in consumers into the banking and, investments and all this, very, very early, even now, right? That was the opportunity. It was going from paper to digital, right? The second wave is now that everybody's in digital, what else can we do, right?
Correct.
And Nandan had a beautiful slide very early on. Again, his visionary way of explaining it. He said this is going to create a digital exhaust. The combination of the social media, the combination of digital transactions, and just bringing everybody into this ecosystem, whether you're an MSME, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a large business. And that is going to democratize all the services, whether it's access to credit, whether it's access to investments, whether it's access to insurance, right? And I once tweeted, went somewhere, I saw, a mall asking for him for money, and I said, "Hey, why can't we just have FASTag here?" And I tweeted it, and then read my tweet. He said, "You have not read my 2011 paper," and he forwarded it to me by email saying, "See, I had written that FASTag can be used for all of these things, right?" That's another thing. You go to the US, you don't see any of this stuff. In India, you go to the mall, you go here, you go there, airport parking, FASTag, done, right? If your car is stuck there and you're blocking traffic there, you'll be charged a higher fee. I mean, they've piloted some of these things. So I think some of these things are just, you can't even quantify the amount of progress
when you're talking about this, I suddenly realized that if you think this, you're talking about 2010, we're in 2025, right? We're not talking about 50 years. We're talking about 15 years. 1.4 billion people have literally changed the way they live.
Yeah.
And that's it's not easy.
But 15 years for a startup is a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? But for a government, it's nothing, right?
It's like you said, snapping of a finger. 15 years is literally
And I
nothing.
think all of us as technologists, and perhaps if I rewind my time to my mobile payment entrepreneurship days, we overestimate the impact in the short run, but we dramatically underestimate the long-term impact, right? And that, I think, is the one learning for me that I try to impart to founders, saying you actually have a lot more time,
Right.
right? Don't get caught up in what somebody else is doing. If what you're saying, I mean, there is risk, of course, but if you have thought things through, and that's where sort of the stealth phase of a startup is so important, because pointing the gun 1 degree this way, that way can make a huge difference, right? And it's the same thing is true in a startup as well over the 15-year trajectory. But if you get it right early and stay laser focused and are solving a real problem for a large group of people, you will build a successful company. Now, is it going to, and most of these markets are never winner takes all. I think in a good market, every now and then there'll be a consumer play, but for the most part, at least anything that is solving a real problem, you just make sure you get your solution right. The worst that will happen is you'll probably get acquired, or the best thing that will happen is you'll build a large standalone company. And you can only focus on controlling the problems that you can control. Yes, you have to control the narrative, all that stuff, but ultimately you have to build your business, right? And I think when you're young, you think, oh, I need to become Zepto overnight. I need to become this thing overnight. And even kudos to them for their execution. But Zomato started at the same time as I was running mChek. I'd met Dipinder at that time, 2008. Right? Today, if you see where they are, okay, anybody will say 16 years, I'll take this journey any day, right? But in 2010, he must have also been thinking, how fast can I get here?
And sometimes you just have to survive long enough for the opportunity to show up. Because Zomato's opportunity really showed up during COVID.
Yeah.
Right. Until then, they were just a restaurant listing platform, if you think about it, but literally changed overnight. And then quick commerce hasn't worked anywhere else in the world except for India.
Yeah. Well, the great example was the shirt of mine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was telling you, I was driving in, and
I think people should know about this story.
Well, except for my wife, but hopefully she'll not listen to this part. But yeah, I had a lovely new shirt that she had gifted me. I said, "Oh, let me wear it today at on this recording," and I was a little late, so I said, "Oh, I'll drink my coffee in the car." And of course, in Bangalore traffic, there's some start-stop. The coffee spilled over a beautiful white shirt, which I'll have to launder now. But I was coming in. I called your colleague here and said, I'm a little bit of a problem. And she said, "Let me see the studio. May I have a shirt for you?" But I said, "Well, let me just go to Blinkit and try." And voila, in 15 minutes, paid by UPI, the shirt showed up. And you cannot imagine such things in other parts of the world literally at the right same price, right? Because the surcharge there for small ticket items will be extraordinarily large, right? And so you can't buy a single item or something like that. It probably has had some bad habits, but I think things will settle down. I think right now we're still in this phase where we're all discovering it and stuff like that. Over a period of time, we'll all probably get more organized.
I've always looked at these things as a leap, right? Because I see that India was still by the way only has some 50 million landlines, but we have over 1.2 billion cell phones at this moment, right? India didn't. I mean, I think that
most TV people don't know what a landline is.
Exactly, right? I think TV connections are probably about 100 million, but the number of OTT subscribers is far beyond that. I think in some ways,
and many of them are on the smartphone.
Correct. And then some people may not even have a TV these days, right? Most of them are okay with watching things on a device. And then I think quick commerce is actually India's answer to not doing the typical modern retail way that the US did it, right? Like,
Correct.
There's not going to be any big Walmarts in Hubli or Udupi, but you'll have these dark stores that will service the same thing without requiring the massive infrastructure that Walmart, Kmart. I mean, you would remember Kmart.
Right? This is basically coming back to saturitization in some ways, right? I mean, it's much more saturitized, it's much more personalized, and we'll use data science, right, to see should I be stocking this shirt in the Indiranagar outlet and not what should I be stocking.
In fact, I've done that experiment, right? So in Bombay, I was outside of Dharavi, right, and I looked at the inventory that Instamart had over there versus the inventory Instamart had in Worli, and you could literally see an iPhone disappear. You could see an iPhone in one part of town, and the other part of town does not stock an iPhone. And that's really smart retail, because that saves so much space. It obviously is going to be very, very environmentally friendly as well, despite what people may or may not say about the delivery ecosystem as of now.
This is something that actually, we had the Honorable Minister comment a little bit on what type of problems our startups are solving. And there is some, element of, yes, we should be doing a lot more in deep tech. And I think that's the natural evolution. It's happening. Where down the road, we have Dozy here that can talk about, doing some extraordinary stuff. But the grocery delivery and the e-com delivery and stuff like that's happening in India is driven by extraordinary data science at the back end, right? It is not like somebody's just going and picking up the shirt and delivering it to me. The fact that the shirt is stocked here, that it can be delivered in 17 minutes, that this can be done, that can be done. There's a lot of tech behind the scenes here, and that's, I think, going to create a lot of IP as well, right? And we are seeing second order companies coming on top of it, looking at the data feed and saying, okay, where should I be promoting it? Where should marketing people be, investing more from? Because this is ultimately it's a brand, right?
Correct.
That is also, building a hyper local, advertising network and knowing where to advertise, where their subscribers are more, etc. So it's going to look very, very different here in India, but it's probably a formula just like UPI, right? I haven't been to an ATM machine since 7 years, maybe. I mean, I'm one of the mobile payment bucks, right? So I'm like totally extreme. I will very happily tip somebody 50 rupees wherever given 10 rupees of cash, but I will not pay them a rupee of cash. So I don't go to ATM. You can work in my house for free, or you will get paid digitally. I will get you a bank account. Don't worry about it. But I'm not paying you cash. These are conditions at home. My mother is a avid user of PhonePe. She's nearly 90 now. So Samir keeps saying I need to get her for a testimonial. But we have always, I've always been digital ever since I could. And I don't recognize Indian currency anymore. Because after 2016, all the notes change, the colors change, the denominations change. Somebody gives me cash right now and look and say, are you sure this is money that I can take, right? But life has really been simplified, and you can pretty much go around the country. UPI acceptance is there. They may not always transact themselves in digitally, but we found, a coconut vendor on the highway from I think Davangere to Bangalore or something like that. We were driving, and you ask that lady, and the pride with which she says, "Oh, this is my savings. If you're paying, it's going to my bank account. This is like my long-term thing. I'm not using this money for my survival, right?" I thought it's actually people are realizing that, there is, it's okay if 20-30% of my money is coming digitally. It's actually good for me. And over a period of time, that percentage will go up.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that they're seeing it's good for them because it inculcates the savings habit. Soon they will get into perhaps investing in, banking products like fixed deposits and stuff like that, and eventually into, brokerage and stock market and things like that, right? But the shape will look very different, right? And you have to be ready for high volume, low value, instead of low volume, high value.
Correct. No, and I think it's really is at the cusp. Like you've said it. There is a lot more coming. We've just started to scratch the
Best
surface.
is yet to come.
The first wave of startups that built on this has just happened. There's just so much more. I think we haven't even scratched the surface. When you think about opening up company bank accounts in India, we're still working on that, pre-Aadhaar ecosystem. We don't. Maybe some foreign banks have mastered the art of doing it digitally, but most Indian banks will send you these stack of papers and 60, 70 signatures, and you want
to me, having worked on this, when I'm told, okay, can I get a copy of your Aadhaar and you sign on it? Oh, this is not how it's supposed to be used.
Yeah, exactly.
Please. It is.
It surprises me how, because I without naming banks, but some of the global banks have literally gone digital. There is no signing of paper.
This is the legacy problem.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't have a presence. So like Jio, never ever had to do anything to do with paper because they weren't type then, right? But for Airtel to make that migration, it took a lot of time.
Yeah.
And look, at the end of the day, I think corporate accounts is a small piece of the overall thing. So for the bigger things, they've gone digital. But hopefully over a period of time, this will all just become the way, right? I wish there was a little more of a stick than just to say just make it happen.
Yeah.
right? Exceptions can always be handled, but the default has got to be
I'm
like.
just hoping that this part of the interview makes it to Nandan sir and he has a slide somewhere saying, this is also supposed to happen.
What I'm worried is some bank CEO say, "Oh my God, now RBI will be on my case for this." But no, I think for those who have adopted it, kudos to them, and they have really, I think, saved them a lot. In fact, one of the analysis we did during the 18 months at UIDAI was actually going and seeing how much telcos spend on warehousing of in the telco. I mean, warehouses for storing the KYC documents.
Absolutely.
By my calculation at the time, Airtel was probably spending, and I just use them as an example, as a proxy for the ecosystem, right? Whether it's telecom, banking, all the regulated entities. Because you have to store this stuff, right? Something goes wrong within 7 years, you need to be able to pull up the right document, etc. And it's like looking for a needle in the haystack. They probably were spending maybe 100 crores a year just warehousing all this stuff.
And that cost is only going up. I know Writers Corporation, and these are the.
And it's real estate, right?
Yeah.
And some, danger of, fire or something like that happens, it's paper. It's just total waste of time and money. And
I always ask the bank that I just signed for an account, opened a checking account with you last year. You asked me to sign the exact same papers again this year. Can't you just go back to the old papers and say, hey, this doesn't need to happen?
But, re-KYC is a regulatory requirement for all of them. But, with UID, once the KYC is done, all you have to know is that it's the same thing. You just hit the API again and get an auth code, an OTP, and you're done.
Yeah.
So the compliance goes up, right? It's, and earlier, Reserve Bank would come and sit down in your office and say, okay, let me do some sampling of your thing. Okay, 1 in 10 corporate accounts, 1 in 100 consumer accounts. I just want to see, right? And they pull it up. Now they can do 100% compliance check sitting in their office, right? With regulatory, I mean, they just need access to.
I'm surprised that we don't
the
have a company Aadhaar.
Let's fund one.
Yeah, there you go. I'm done.
Don't.
We're ready. Nandan sir, if you're listening, we would love to have you as one of our senior
I think that way. I think one amazing thing about Nandan also is very clear boundaries about, how to, and I think his integrity and ethics is another, it just comes across in everything he says.
Yeah.
But I think, the opportunities here across the board are still waiting to be, we have basically peeled, a couple of layers, and it's smelling like a beautiful rose. It's not an onion, but opportunity is going to be huge here.
So I think this is like a perfect segue to now understand, founder throughout the journey. You've seen multiple cycles. Obviously, 2008 was another cycle you saw, right? After seeing.
Yeah, where I was in the middle of a fundraise.
Yeah.
And my valuation.
I was going to ask you, like, how many
down
fundraisers?
70% in one shot, in one phone call. Okay.
But mChek raised how many rounds?
We raised 2 rounds. There was a round before I was thinking, and 1 round later. That's all.
And it must have been a difficult environment. Obviously, after you joined, having 2007, you must have been like sort of at a peak, and then you just saw everything.
Yeah, crumble.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, this is life, right? I mean, one thing that kept me going for another 2 years after that was I didn't see anything I was doing wrong or the company was doing wrong. Yes, there was a macro thing that changed, what people saw as the valuation of the company, but the value to the customer was always there, right? And it might have been 5 years too early, might have been 7 years too early, but it was clear to me that this is what, I mean, anybody who touched it and used the product never went back, right? Our cohorts for prepaid recharge and stuff, right, were like extraordinarily dark green, right? Because why would you go to the retailer at the end of the road in the rain and shout out your number and give him your money?
Yeah.
And you could do 4 clicks and you're done, right? And it was on the fly. And I'm sure we weren't that smart enough to, because we were a service provider ultimately to a telco, that to know how these cohorts were doing in terms of ACVs versus those who didn't have access to it. Because you're never out of talk time.
Right.
Could be anywhere in the world, just 4 clicks and done, and you can continue talking, right? So, of course, we wanted the holy grail. There was money transfer, and M-Pesa had done that, but in a very different regulatory environment. And I think the telcos were struggling for it. And eventually, that led to the definition of a prepaid wallet ecosystem. That led to the definition of the creation of payment banks and small finance banks. All of these things, just trying to say, okay, can we have a few more guardrails and allow other people who've traditionally not been bankers to manage other people's money. I think we missed a few tricks there, but in the long run, again, it all works out. right?
Interesting. There
So,
was a company in India called Inventure, which went on to become called Tala,
mhm,
which was sort of trying to create this lending ecosystem on
yes,
top of small digital, small kind of transactions. And because of the lack of a UPI at the time, went to Kenya to
yep,
create M-Pesa. I was a
yep.
seed investor, one of the guys that
Oh,
backed it.
wow.
And I remember Shivani really
Hmm.
struggled. I mean, someone coming from
She
the
was
US.
Los Angeles based, right?
Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes,
still
I know.
is.
Hmm.
And now Tala is this massive global ecosystem builder. They've I think they're almost a bank in Mexico. They're in Philippines. They're trying
Yeah,
to
it's an
re-enter
amazing
India. I
story.
mean, but literally it took her to get to Kenya and the M-Pesa ecosystem, which then used to wonder, yeah, why is this not happening in India? Uh,
True. And I would say it wasn't for lack of effort by the telcos.
hmm,
But I think what became very clear was this whole idea of, walled gardens and, an Airtel Live customer can get access to this, but the other guys cannot. And we were going that separation because, see, there was always this battle for the customer between the telcos, the banks, and the handset makers. Because if
hmm,
you recall, Nokia had 76% market
yeah,
share at the time, right? And with their Symbian series of phones, in fact, the beauty of mChek on the SIM card was it ran on a Nokia 1100 phone, right? Which was
wow,
the early entry level phone you could think of. And I always felt that was sort of an attempt at going mass. But when you launch some new things, you have to make it aspirational, right? And it sort of, if it what Apple proved was, you could make, I mean, and of course it's Apple, right? As a startup, you can't take that strategy, but making something aspirational is very important as well, right? And I think, trying to solve the problem for everybody on day zero, and trying to solve it in a scalable platform, that's typically not something that startups should be doing. Startups should be focusing on a very narrow set of
yeah,
customers,
I believe
execute
so.
extraordinarily well, support them, extremely inefficiently, but very, very well. Get them to brag about the product, get them to be, in love with your product. And then you can sort of say, okay, how do we massify this, right? And the downside of having to work with the telco or having chosen to work with the telco and having chosen to work with the big banks and Visa is, you can't fit their egos in the room at the same time, right? And it's true because everyone is looking, I mean, because they have their huge brands and their how they have built their businesses to
Right.
protect, right? And it's very hard to align these two, right? And when the banks were ready, the telcos were not. When the telcos were ready, the banks were not. When both were ready, Visa was not. When all three were ready, the regulator came in, right? So it was one of those. And I would be this little startup ant going, flying to Mumbai, flying to Delhi. I think I was the only thing that got built for some time was Kingfisher Airlines on the back of my travel. But I think when the smartphone era came, right, it was very clear there that, okay, now you need one person to agree and you can align with that one person, right? Whether it was uh, a bank or whether it was getting your own license like Paytm ended up doing, and whether it was later on, of course, with UPI, again, an
Hmm,
ecosystem came, but it was, bludgeoned through the system, very open to others. I think UPI's big thing was allowing the private sector also to just partner with a bank,
hmm,
right? And somewhere along the way, I had started EzeTap, right? And one of the big learnings for me there was that you need to be able to partner with one person to have access to the network, right? And control your destiny. So you could work with the smallest bank. You did not need an HDFC bank or an SBI or an ICICI bank to be your partner. A small bank in Kerala was enough because once you're on the network,
yeah,
now you can control your destiny, right? And you can work with them and scale up very fast. And eventually, the big guys will come on your network, right? And it's just hard for big guys to move with a startup. I think that's something that big entities have never figured out how to work with. But as long as you pick a battle where you're a partner with a small person, you're not competing with them, you're not diluting their brand, you're just building your own thing, which is completely incremental and accretive revenue to them. If it succeeds, if it doesn't succeed, they have not lost anything. I think those are some formulas that I learned from my mChek days. And I said, you know what, everything I do from now on is going to be on one side of the network and it's going to be with requiring one partner. And the smaller the partner, the better. I want to be someone who's seen as walking into the CEO's office with a check rather than going to the collections department and asking for a check.
Wow.
So that every business I've started or incubated or backed subsequently has been something like that, right? Whether it is EzeTap, whether it was HapPay, where you again had to work, I think we worked initially with RBL Bank, whether it was Neo, whether it was MoneyTap, all of these had that characteristic. Right now, as you scale up, you might go and pick larger partners, you might work with them and bring value. But starting off, actually, both for the larger partner as well as for the startup, it just doesn't make any sense, right? So you have to pick the right go-to-market
I almost
strategy.
feel that what we're talking about now is when people talk about enterprise sales, right? They don't really realize that the scale at which these I've heard of startups
Correct.
saying, "Hey, I can address," or I'm talking to IBM, or I'm like, IBM is a massive company. By the time you get this contract through their entire ecosystem, it could be 18 months, right?
Yeah.
And you still have to survive and kill every day to be able to feed yourself for tonight or next month or whatever metric you want to look at it. And you just so beautifully encapsulate that it's better to go after that smaller enterprise, maybe at the cusp of becoming an enterprise, but really a large MSME kind of a player.
Yeah.
And that person could really be that the testing ground, and they would appreciate, right? You're a rainmaker to them. You're bringing a check to the CEO's office. Come on the rainmaker side, figure out things with them. They'll probably be way more malleable because you're
Correct.
obviously paying them money, right? And for some small companies, not small but large MSMEs.
Anything to do with regulatory side, that compliance and stuff is non-negotiable, right?
Correct.
That to me is black and white, right? There is no concept of a gray area. We're not trying to stretch the rules of
Absolutely, and we
the
shouldn't.
boundaries.
Yeah.
If something is not white, I deem it to be black. So it's very conservative
Perfect.
in that approach. Excuse me. The moment it's white, then you have to be very systematic and very smart about how you pick your partner, and don't go for gold right at the beginning, right? You got to start. You got to start playing gully cricket before you go to school cricket,
so
before
true,
you
so
go to state cricket, before you go to the IPL.
And
Right?
sometimes you even have to play bathroom cricket before you get to gully cricket.
But imagine that you're playing it also, right? Which is another interesting thing, right? Visualizing success
Yeah.
for founders. But I guess we'll come back to those things. So I think coming back to my journey a little bit there, I think there were a lot of these lessons learned. And so when I started doing things, so during the UID days, I started ZipDial with Valerie and Amia. I started EzeTap, and then Bobby and with Bhakta, and then Bobby came soon after. We had a 4-bedroom apartment, a villa in Koramangala, which was ZipDial, but the 4th bedroom and toilet were EzeTap. And so that's how I was able to work on the UID project as well as work on incubating 2 startups. I had some savings, 60 lakhs at the time, put 30 lakhs in one company, 30 in the other company. I went back to broke again. Of course, my wife was working, so that was a little bit of a cushion we had. And both played out, both panned out very well. ZipDial ended up being a good outcome to Twitter in 2015, and EzeTap recently to Razorpay. So, but you have to go all in. I think there is
almost like your Elon Musk moment, right? Just to call your money and say, "Hey, I'm going to back these 2 things."
I love how you use these big words. Nowhere there. For him, it won't even be the chiller lying in his sofa. But yes, you have to be all in, right? At whatever scale. And I think that's the lesson here, right? I mean, ZipDial was a sort of mid 30 million scale outcome to Twitter. For whatever reason, as much as Karthik supported us and Unilaser supported us and Jungle supported us, and of course Prime, all of us had put personal money in, it was not yet in the fund structure, we just couldn't raise big money. And as a result, a $30 million outcome was a huge outcome for everyone, right? I think the last person who put money in got a 2.4x in like 6 months.
Wow.
Right? In dollars, by the way. Right? So it really was spectacular for everyone around the table. And that's why that company, you'll see this on so many VCs pitch decks to their LPs, right? Because actually a lot of people helped build that company, and everybody got a solid outcome, and IRR wise got a spectacular outcome. It was a very short gestation. EzeTap took much longer, of course. It was a 12-year journey. I didn't invest in both JustPay and Razorpay because I thought that at some point this would be one company. Little did I know that they would out execute us and then come back and acquire the company, but it's still a solid outcome. And I think that was an example of saying that, but we did things which had never been done and have never been done. So, right? We built point of sale terminals in India from scratch, right? Fully certified, Visa, MasterCard, EMV certified, etc. The things we learned, and I sort of was de facto product manager for this company for a long time, sitting with Bhakta and designing the terminal and, mandating it has to look like an iPhone. It cannot be any bigger than that.
Yeah.
But the testing they do on those devices to make them certified is mind blowing. They will actually insert a 0.1 mil pin to try to see if they can reach the pin entry device terminal, and the device has to shut down, has to like permanently shut down, right? If it detects any of this, or they will grind the surface of it. So you take it to lab and they demolish your device every which way you do. And in some ways, that's been sort of the downfall of the card-based networks in India, because the bar was so high to enter, right? And so when UPI came out, it was a QR code, a static thing printed on a piece of paper, and you could receive money. It's no wonder that the Phone Pays and the Bharat Pays and the Paytms managed to like bludgeon this into the market. Paytm had already done it once with their proprietary one, and then subsequently with UPI, because the cost of servicing the customer went down dramatically, right? And it was like not even close, right? I mean, it's like it was not. I don't even know how many orders are made. It was basically free, right, to onboard the customer, and they could start receiving money, right? So I think that was the other thing, that proprietary is only good up to a certain point, and if you don't embrace the change early, you won't be around. Right. And I think in India, we have proven that over and over again. I remember when Nandan talked about the WhatsApp moment, he actually calls me out and says, "Hey, Sanjay, I'm sorry, but this is what it's going to do to EzeTap and, the terminal-based strategies, right?" Um, and, it just the speed at which things changed in India. It seems like sometimes, it takes generations to see a week of change. Sometimes it takes weeks to see generations of change, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happened with UPI.
It was an insane moment, and I think you were almost in the middle, because I think of this.
Yeah. I mean, that was with my iSprit hat, right? And demonetization happened, and obviously a lot of stuff did not go well. But one of the outcomes of that ended up being that people said, "Hey, we need to perhaps use this opportunity, or say more from a requirement, to go digital as every which way we could." And at that time, there was a mad scramble because Demon was going to end on December 30th, and we had to show something working. And the Just Pay team, Nikhil, who was later the Setu co-founder, Pramod, everyone put their heads together. I had a small role to play. I think it was mostly them at the time. Of UPI was already live, saying, "Let's build this app." And the app was called Bharat PAY, right? On the last day, it was changed to Bheem, right? And Bheem was launched the next day, right? And it was named apparently by the Prime Minister himself. So Bheem was launched, and then that momentum picked up, right? Because it's a very simple app.
Yeah.
You just had send, receive, and view your transactions. 3 buttons, right? And it worked. And again, kudos to the Just Pay team for just sort of rolling up their sleeves and doing this, just sort of the goodwill of wanting to make it happen. Because it was an independent app. It was not HDFC's app, it was not SBI's app, it was not PhonePay's app, it was not
government
Paytm's
app.
It was a government app, right? And
I remember the government
app,
website.
but it's really built by tech geeks, right? So it had that finish.
But the point that what I was trying to make is, the government websites, even today, some of them are terrible.
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah. And government websites are not known for data security, right? I mean, but here you had an app which had to do financial transactions, and they got the whole and to their credit, got the whole country not only to trust them, but actually works.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that trust comes when it works.
Yeah.
Right. I used to always say, what's the marketing tagline for any startup? You can claim whatever you want, but the real marketing tagline is when consumers say it just works. Right? Because that people just assume you've taken care of everything else. Trust goes away when you get one SMS from one side saying transaction went through, and on the other side, the guy says, "I've not got my confirmation SMS.
Correct.
Right? And now you're sitting there saying, "I bought this shirt, I need to wear it immediately for Anirudh's podcast." But that guy is saying, "I haven't got confirmation that the money has hit my bank account. How can I release this to you?" Right? And because I'm a total stranger to him.
Correct.
right? So these are things that, if everything just works, and if it doesn't work immediately, if you build the automatic, this is something we did in mChek a lot. With the first system where if you paid your bill, Airtel had to open up APIs.
Correct.
In fact, there's some funny stories on that too. But they opened up these APIs where you could check the bill amount and you press a button, enter 4-digit PIN, and within 10 seconds, you'll get a confirmation. And if you check your bill amount, it'll say zero right after that. The new APIs were introduced because of us, actually, because we wanted that workflow to work. And IBM Research actually had won the Airtel contract. They were doing the new API implementation. And suddenly somebody got charged 1 lakh rupees instead of 1,000 rupees. What the heck happened? How is this possible? Our system was working flawlessly. One customer, it turned out that they were rolling out a new version of the APIs, and everything was going to be in paisa from now on, and not in rupees and paisa. And they had rolled it out in Calcutta or something like that, and somebody had to pay 1,006 rupees. I ended up paying 1,06 rupees, 600 rupees, and the bill and the card went through. So then we had to say, okay, can you reverse the API? Of course, one transaction we could reverse. And I said, no, this is the new API we're rolling out. We'll call you the previous night and tell you which circle we're going to roll out, and then we had to also build some logic to say, okay, is it on the old API or the new API and stuff.
And
right?
when you think about the fact that recently somebody at Citibank, I think, transferred something like $38
Yes.
trillion, right? How did that transaction even go through?
See, these are the things where the banks actually have some pretty mature systems, although they might have been sort of not so well done. The maker checker concept, etc. Right? I mean, now you understand the reason for some of these things, right? It could be fraud, it could be collusion, it could be just a mistake. And then these mistakes can be really costly.
But I think you were also going through some sort of a founding inertia at the time, because you had ZipDial, EzeTap, and then you also started Angel Prime. 2011. I think it's all around that same 2010 to 2012 era.
Yeah, so they're all sort of correlated. I think one of my lessons learned was I'm very good at taking a startup stock price down from whatever to zero. Maybe I should start at zero. At least I can't take it any further down, right? So that's when both ZipDial and EzeTap sort of started. And Shripati and Bala and I were working on the UID program as volunteers. And one day I just whispered to Shripati saying, hey, I've started these two things. Sort of both are interesting here. So then three of us got together. We used to be virtually next door neighbors and said, well, do you plan to run these things? And I said, no, I've got good co-founders in one case. And the other case, we're looking for a CEO. I said, well, we have somebody that we know. And so that's how Bobby got introduced and Abhijit. And that's how he came into EzeTap. And he had worked at NGPay, so he actually knew a little bit about this mobile commerce industry. And I said, look, I'd rather be doing more of these than being an entrepreneur myself. And they both were co-founders of Snapfish, classmates from IIT. They'd seen a big exit and stuff. And we're also very interested in the space. And all three of us had worked on Aadhaar. And so it's okay, let's do something together here. And so for ZipDial, we put in personal money. We raised a little bit, Mumbai Angels, right? It's very interesting because everybody got almost like a 10x return in 4 years. I remember. I didn't know half the people that invested in the company, but I will randomly go to some Inc. 42 conference and somebody says, oh, this guy gave me a 10x return in 4 years. And they say, who are you? Right? But obviously very grateful for the support we got from investors at the time. And in fact, Sunil Goyal as well, right? And that was his first angel check, and then he started Your Nest. So he also, literally every early stage VC fund in India has had a hand in building of ZipDial and then benefited from it also. But ultimately, it was clear to me that I wanted to be more actively involved with founders. And that's what led to Angel Prime. And eventually, when Fund 2 came and Bala moved on and Amit joined us as a partner, the angel industry was starting to get its own identity. And we said, okay, we're not that. We are an institutional venture capital fund. So we dropped the word angel. Actually, Bala was a very hardcore, he's a very tough guy, right? And I jokingly say, well, Bala left, so we dropped the word angel. Anybody who knows him knows, oh, that is not him. He's awesome, but he's pretty hard-ass when it comes to working with entrepreneurs. But jokes aside, I think our philosophy stayed the same, right? And I think to this day, We've just closed fund 5, which is now at 100 million. Our first
Correct.
fund was like little under 8 million. And we went 8 to 46 to 72 to 120 and now came back to 100 actually.
Oh, wow.
And we think that's the right cruising altitude for our
Hmm.
stage and our style of working, right? At this stage in India, right? It may go back up over time, but right now this seems like the right thing, which is sized in our mind correctly for the opportunity space, the outcome space, and our ability to consistently deliver solid returns, right? What ultimately you can only control your input metrics, and what happens happens. But we feel very comfortable with this number, and so we said this is the right number for us, right? But the philosophy has not changed. The approach has evolved more because the market has evolved, but
Correct.
not necessarily fundamentally different. Our belief is early stage, right, is where people need to work with people that they believe have seen the journey also, right? And at least to the earlier comment, have made some of these mistakes or seen some of these mistakes. And if we go through one less cycle of making the same mistakes as an entrepreneur, we're better off, right? So today, we've always prided ourselves on being first institutional checks, and obviously with folks like you and several other funds coming up that are really focused on idea stage, I think we do some of that, but we're happy to also follow a little bit later. And some of the teething issues and stuff that have been addressed, and obviously that comes at a price. But sort of there are various euphemisms used in the industry: seed plus round, pre-Series A round, and Series A might also be the right one. But that's our sweet spot. We typically, and this has been true for us from the first year, we do 3 to 5 deals a year. There's never been a year, including 2021, where we did more than that. There have been years where we've done less than that, but in 3 to 5 is sort of our sweet spot. We built up a pretty strong team now. We've added a new partner, Bridge, from was the co-founder of Magic Pin, has joined us now as a partner full time. And in some ways, some of these things, if they're working, innovation is not the right thing to do here, right? And the innovation comes from the ideas we're backing, from the approaches we're taking to working with the founders, etc. But the philosophy of saying early stage, back companies well, do a lot of thorough underwriting. So we don't typically rush into, like one meeting.
If I can give you a personal
investments.
story, I first heard about Prime. I was at a conference. This was when it was too early to be giving presentations. I was taking in a presentation. It was done by Amit Somani. And Amit was I had seen multiple people talk about the startup ecosystem, and usually, unfortunately, there were those people that I think should not have been talking about it because they were a little bit too old to be understanding what this new generation of founders wanted. And there you had Amit Somani, and he was doing this insanely specific, precise presentation, which I don't think most of the audience got, but I was completely enamored, and it was my I think it was that was the moment when I said, if I was ever going to do a presentation, it has to be backed by the kind of data that this person. I had no idea who Prime was, by the way, right? Because I don't think Prime was in the habit of really tomming a lot, right? There was amazingly insane bets.
Yeah. People tell us you're the best kept secret in India. So it's not really by intent, but thank you. It's sort of a backhanded compliment.
But when I saw that, I was like, the amount of information that he gave out, I think he was only on stage for like 15 or 20 minutes, what I remember.
Yeah, he is intense.
Intense. It was, and I've seen him 2 or 3 times present, and it was really, really amazing to know that there was someone in India that had that level of conviction and the level of detailing into a thesis. And I've realized over a period of time, and obviously now we interviewed Varun for one of our podcasts a couple of weeks ago, that quite honestly, the Prime really puts a lot of high conviction stuff into every bet it makes. It's not just trying to spray and pray, which has been sort of the buzzword in our ecosystem, unfortunately, over the last 10 years. Is spray and pray. Go make 100 deals before you even figure out what's going to happen. But I felt that Prime really, I'm not sure if it's because you were an entrepreneur and the other people in the team are also entrepreneurs turned investors, that you really go very, very deep into companies. Like, what's been the key there? Is it the founder led journeys that led to founder turned investor things that have led to it, or what's been the case there?
I think a lot of it is first-hand
Hmm.
experiences, of course, right? And it's also ultimately, we're three partners. Now we've added Bridge, right?
Gotcha.
But otherwise, we're three partners here, and then Raj and Ashish, who are what we call partner emeritus, but pretty actively involved with us. I always say that, I would never be able to raise funding from Prime if I had to pitch a startup of my own, right? And my two partners, Sripati, is extraordinarily analytical, amazing when it comes to metrics and so on, right? Of course, he's a great board member, but broadly, that's his sort of like, he stands out. Amit, probably the best product brain in India, right? And, he can understand tech at the lowest of levels, both he and Sripati actually, right? And he can also be the big thinker, right? And I am the dreamer, right? And the tagline guy, and every founder comes, I give them some new tagline, some new ideas, and partners are like, where are you? Don't give the ideas right now after we invest in them, right? But we all have this philosophy that every founder we meet has got to succeed, has got to take one thing out of the meeting.
Yep.
Whether we invest in them or not is people invest in 4 companies a year, we meet 4,000 technically
Correct.
speaking. So probability is actually very low, but when you do it, we have to be all in.
Yeah.
So our model to this day is all partners work with all companies, right? And so now you can't have too many companies.
Right.
So to this day, we have, maybe less than 50 companies that we have ever backed over 14 years.
Wow.
But when we're in, we're all in, right? We might have all our disagreements prior to, pulling the trigger. But after that, there's no conversation of, hey, I told you this was never going to work. Right? It's like we're all in, and the founder can reach out to anybody. So Mudit, who's down the road here at Dozy, he was once telling me he wanted some thesis on how to build his org and stuff like that. The biggest org I built was 4 people, right? And we all got fired. So, I'm not very good at it, right? I said, why are you talking to me? The god of org building is Mr. Amit Somani. Just reach out to him. So he came and met Amit in our office. And I didn't even know Mudit was coming to meet Amit. I bumped into him in the restroom saying, oh, what are you doing in the office? He said, oh, I've come to meet Somani.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, and we're totally cool with it. Right. And the same thing is true when it comes to fundraising. Probably I will go through every single deck and, work with every founder and say, okay, no, this is how you should say it, things like that, which I feel is sort of my X factor, if I might bring to the table. But it doesn't matter if Amit led the deal or Sripati led the deal or now Bridge led the deal, right? So we play this as a team sport. And all our incentives are only aligned to making every single investment we invest in as successful as possible. So it really doesn't matter who was the lead partner on it. The external world might say, oh, Sripati Acharya on the board of quizzes did an amazing job there. Amit wasn't even in the fund that invested in quizzes, but he still spends a ton of time. So we just have said, there are no boundaries here for what you can do to help, but help we must, right? Now, in any fund, as you will see, maybe 30-40% of the companies get to a scale where they're really going to be meaningful outcomes for us. But there's another 60-70% of the companies that can have an outcome that is very material to the founder, right? And sometimes that is when we make our reputation, right? We did very, very well in Happy. We did very, very well in Reco. Perpule had a modest exit, but the 3 founders have gone off, started their new startups, etc. It was important for us. And I remember having that conversation with Abhinav and spending a lot of time with him, coaching him on, on the outcome. It's not a needle mover for the fund, but we got a multiple on our return, so it was still very respectable. But for the 27-year-olds, they're set for life. Now they can play, come out after 2 more years at Amazon and, go for broke and try something big, right? So this is a business where, first of all, first lesson I was taught in this business was by Sripati. I even remember where we were driving, where he said this to me. Said, Sanjay, I hope you're ready. Venture capital is a get rich slow scheme. Right. And 15 years later, I keep telling him, Sripati, we have proven the slow part over and over and over again. When the heck are we going to prove this get rich part, right? But that's really what it is. There isn't a quick buck here. Right? You might get lucky, but outside of that, it's really going to take its time. In fact, that is the title of the book I plan to write someday. And I've registered the domain getrichslow.vc. I don't expect any entrepreneur to send their business plans to that domain. But, it's one of those.
Getrichslow.vc.
But so that's, I think the important thing here is the team
Yeah.
and extraordinary trust and respect with each other, right? We disagree. I mean, if any of our team members or founders visited us during our offsite when it's all the partners, they would think the partnership is breaking up because we are at each other, hammer and tongs. But that radical candor and openness brings the trust, right? Where we know that.
How often do you do these offsites?
We do it at least twice a year. Once during the pandemic, actually, we did it in the office and told the team, don't come to the office because we don't want to go anywhere, but we'll sit here in the office and do it. But that was actually the culture that Amit brought into the partnership. And the first time we did it, we went to Oman, slightly more exotic location, and we were on the boat having the biggest argument. And we knew we had to solve this because none of us knew how to swim back to shore. And that started the culture actually. And I think it's helped a lot because when you let things fester is when things break apart, right? And if you can't openly talk to your partner, it's true in marriage, it's true with children, and it's true with everything else, even including with founders.
Do you have somebody that moderates the discussion?
No,
Okay.
it's just us. It's just us, right? See, one thing we know is we're committed to the doing the right thing, right? For the firm. And that means doing the right thing for ourselves, doing the right thing for our LPs, doing the right thing for our team, doing the right thing for our founders, right? So that all that has to be aligned. If you're not doing that, a chain is as strong as its weakest link,
Correct.
right? So of course there'll be moments where there's some tension at all levels, but ideally you want to align everybody here, and you have to do the same thing, for your customers if you're the portfolio company as well, right? So I think having a moderator is not really very helpful in such situations because they won't have the context, right? And the nuances are everything here.
And they can actually color the discussion also, right?
And color
with their
the
own
discussion,
biases.
etc. We do actually, and I just became a senior citizen. I'm eligible for 0.5% extra in FTs, by the way. Very proud of myself. But even at this stage,
You're also eligible for 10% discount on all Marriott properties.
And 600 rupees on Indigo. I can upgrade to row 13C, at no cost now. So effectively, right? I mean, these benefits I was like, if this is what becoming a senior citizen was, I should have done it earlier. Why
You
did I
could have
wait till
changed your birth date on the Aadhaar card earlier also. You were part of it.
No, such luck. But I always tell people, who make fun of me, I said, if I tell you all the benefits, you'll want to be 60 before you realize, sooner rather than later. But having said that, I think we're still starting a new executive coaching session, right? Which is something which I think is a thing Amit was a big proponent of. I was completely a non-believer, but I've seen the change in teammates. I've seen the change in founders, and now I'm like, wow, it's the first thing we should be telling founders to do, right? It just makes such a difference to their.
Tell us a bit about this executive coaching.
Yeah, so executive coaching, I think I always thought it was only in big companies where this stuff is. And IBM, Amit has had a lot of experience at IBM and Google and Make My Trip and so on. But I think even for entrepreneurs, right, this self-awareness and building a team and knowing when to, the first thing I was told yesterday was, adapt, alter, accept, and I always forget the fourth one. These are personality, these are things we can control, right? Quite often we are in a business where we can't control our outcomes. You can only control the journey. You can not control the journey. You can't control the outcomes. You can only control what you do, and hopefully you get to enjoy the journey, right? And in controlling what you do is how you react to a situation when the customer is being a jerk. How do you handle that situation? I think we all can learn at all times, right? Like today when you and I got stuck in traffic there because the street was too narrow and I had an Innova in front, you could have been honking at me from your cab at the back. We both realized the bigger purpose was showing up here on time and, and being calm about it. And quietly got out of the car. Maybe 5 years ago, I would have probably yelled at the guy saying, how are you parking your scooter across this narrow street? Can't you park it sideways or whatever? But in all of these, that's a very trivial example to say there will be irritants, right? Eyes on the prize, focusing on the big things and being able to step back very quickly and calmly comes naturally to a few people, doesn't come naturally to people like me. I'm a super emotional guy. Shripati is like ultimate calm, right? He's like such a calm guy. It's like really sometimes irritatingly calm. Right? It's like, how can you not be upset by this? What did you do to for this situation to arise? And the answer is nothing, right? So I think when we have such situations, people these are team members that you want to be very, you want to complement yourself with such people, right? And I remember talking to Nandan about the Infosys team. He used to always tell me, right, it's like everybody's very different. There's a common goal and common integrity, ethics, all of those things. The value system was very common, but skills were actually very complementary, right? And that's how you build a strong team, where you actually look for what is dissimilar about the person. When you look at a founder also, it's very easy to naively say, well, IIT, IIM, blah, 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 all these, pattern matching things. But really, in early stage, you're looking for the one exceptional thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're not looking in venture capital to say what will make sure this thing doesn't go down. We're saying what's that one pointy profile, right? That's going to make this thing an outrageous success, right? And so when you're building teams, and as we discuss in our offsites, for example, or with executive coaching and stuff, it's really helping founders and VCs and ourselves in life also focus on the big prize in a particular point in time and ignore the returns, right? And I think that's what I'm looking to get out of this. We just started a new session starting yesterday.
Is that executive coaching done by somebody in-house, or is
No,
it?
that is out. That they're a professional. This is a professional thing.
Okay.
And we are also doing this in this case as a team. So we're kind of all going to the same coach.
Oh, very
so that,
interesting.
We'll see, how it works out.
I might have to steal this coach's details from you, because that's something that I've always wanted to get done.
That you just have to fund one of our companies.
But I think one of the things I definitely want you to talk about, because and I think Sudhir Sethi said it best, right? That eventually we're also venturepreneurs, right? We are entrepreneurs. We're just running a venture fund, and most people don't realize that it's much more difficult to raise capital to fund startups than to raise capital to fund a startup, right? It's been my learning that because you're trying to convince someone that you have the ability to do something that they may not be able to do so, or you at least have better access to something. But in this journey, you've picked up partners along the way, right? How have you picked these partners? And I'm talking very, very specifically for founders, because I feel sometimes they either pick someone that looks or talks like them, or they pick somebody that they don't know at all but sounds logically the right thing to do. I've also had situations where a founder was forced upon a team by the accelerator or the seed investor, because that particular investor wanted better control on that team, right? And India typically, I would say, just I'm not really quoting any stat, but I would imagine 80% of Indian startups are more than two founders, which is very different than what I've seen in the US, but typically it's more one founder led ecosystems. But you've done this, and you've done this really well. You've picked up some really amazing partners along the way. How do you choose these people? How and do you need to have some history with them before they come on as a partner? What's been the methodology?
Yeah, I think it's almost no different from backing founders as well, right? It's a lot of common things here. I think trust, right, has to be established.
Okay.
Right. And that means that can happen in one meeting, right? But it's rare, right? I mean, even if it does, this is probably a big enough decision that you want to, although I had an arranged marriage, met my wife for an hour in a group, and then the next day proposed to her, and we got married in 10 days. So I've done that also, 33 years now. So that is a bit too late now, all the warranty periods and all that are done. But I think in life, in fact, I even tell founders, picking your seed stage or early first investor is harder than marriage, because there's no way out, right, of this relationship in some ways. I think definitely, I think Sachin Bansal had once posted a tweet: if there's any doubt, there's no doubt, right? You just can't hire somebody, or you can't partner with somebody. If there's any doubt, there's actually no doubt. Right? There cannot be any doubt, right? And I think each one has a different threshold for what they're willing to evaluate to make a decision, and what they're willing to say, once I've made this decision, whatever else comes, this decision is made and it's irreversible, right? As a partnership, thankfully, my other two partners have a much higher threshold than me. So I'm always the one I go by gut feel. And in fact, even when we evaluate deals, even if I'm leading the deal, Shripati will know the metrics better than me. Amit will know the team better than me. Because to me, I come out of a meeting, I almost don't remember what the founder said. I just come out, is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down for me, right? That's my only thing I'm looking for. Can I trust this human being at the other end? And do they believe what they are saying? Right? That's all. Are they saying it because they think I need to hear it? Or are they saying it because they believe in it? Right?
I try to meet some hashtags to make sure that, yeah.
Yes, right. So one of my secrets, and if founders listen to it, is I only look people in the eye. Because to me, the mouth can say whatever it wants to say, or the brain wants it to say, but the eyes can never lie.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're looking somebody in
Wow.
the eye, and when I do a Zoom call, what people don't see is I have a 42-inch monitor, and the founder who's pitching me is like 90% of that screen. And I am literally just focused on one thing. Do they believe what they're saying? And are they truthful about what they're saying? Right. I mean, eventually we'll evaluate all the other things. And I'm saying this as a broader answer to your question specifically about partners. But I think that's the trust you need to build up, right? Because a lot of the evaluation of, how did you do this? What did you do in this situation, etc., that comes out conversationally. But really, the past of, that you built a startup is completely irrelevant to becoming a partner in a VC fund. This is a new journey, right? So those might all be sort of ways of saying, okay, you dealt with adversity. Adversity came, and like we look at Bridge at Magic Pen, they rebuilt the company like 3 times during the first phase. Then something went wrong. Then the pandemic came. Then they're like, but adversity though he has seen, right? And as he has seen a lot of what most entrepreneurs might never get to see, right? And the fact that he's rebounded from it was a very, very important thing for us. Then the rest of the part, is this the right stage in your career? Is Prime the right place for you? What do you like about us, etc.? These are all important things, right? But fundamentally, whatever you did you do it with the highest level of intellectual integrity? With did you do things sort of thoughtfully or knee jerk? Are you capable of doing things sort of as a instinct based without having all the data? We are in the business where the stage at which you and I invest in companies, there's no data. So what are you going to look at? Right? Some, maybe now we do a little bit later stage also. So we do have a little bit of data, but you can't draw a line from here to there, right? So you have to believe that these founders are going to carry the dream, or these partners are going to stick with you for a long period of time, and that you're going to enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Would you go out on a holiday with this person? Right? Would you go out to dinner? Right? If you had one free evening, would you say, let's go out and have dinner together? Right? These are, you just cannot say, okay, this is a relationship in the office and it starts and ends here. Right? This is such a boutique thing, right? And the other thing, with a small VC fund in that sense, is there's no place to hide. Right? You can't say, okay, I don't like Sanjay Swamy, but that's okay. I've got enough work to do. Sorry, if you come to Prime, you got to like Sanjay Swamy, right? And Sanjay Swamy has to like you as well.
Yeah.
Because we are, investment team is 8 people, and we just keep seeing each other whether you like it or not, right? So I think a lot of these cannot be quantified, but you have a feeling for it. And I think I always say trust the first impression, right? Gut instinct, right? That has never been a situation where I was like turned off by somebody, but then said, oh, maybe it is a good company after all, right? Or a good person to be with after all. The first time matters a lot. Over a period of time, that might say, oh, I didn't see this part about this person. And that's where the evaluation phase is. But finding a partner in a venture capital fund, especially, is a huge decision, right? So you have to check references, you have to have everyone. So maybe the one thing we say is, and this is true with funding also, everybody has a veto, right? Right? So nobody should be vetoing. Some might be a strong yes, some might be a weak yes, some might even be a weak no. But are you a veto or not is a complete independent decision. And we will never do something where one of the partners is vetoing, right? We may lose a lot of money in the process because somebody was a veto. But that is the trust that we have in the partnership, right? This is the price of being in a team, right? There are a lot of pluses, but the downside is that I'm so crazy about this company, and Damani will be like, no, I don't think it's a good thing. And Shripati will say, yeah, I'm also, I'm not sure about this, right? And I'm like, hallelujah, I thought this is the greatest thing, right? But you can't do it, right? And we don't do any angel checks.
Right.
So we've kept that very simple. We're completely aligned with our LPs. There is no thing, it's either a prime deal or it's not a prime deal. And I can do whatever I want in my power to convince them. And they're all reasonable guys too, right? So I can sit and debate on this thing, and they will turn around. Many a time they have turned around, right? And so I was like, oh, wow, I didn't think about it that way. Maybe it's interesting. If they did this, this, and this, it could work. Let's monitor it for some time. These are conversations that we will have. And many a times we have been able to convince each other. But you can't, if you can't convince each other, how the heck are you going to be a high conviction investor, right? Because once we're all in,
It should be
now
all in.
Swamy will do whatever he wants to do to back a company that I've led. I'll do everything to back a company that he's led. We're never going to question again, why did we do this deal, right? We may learn from it and say, okay, this ended up, you were right. Ended up being something that we should have caught earlier and you had flagged it. So next time we will pay more attention to each other, right? But these are things that they happen in this business, but there is never a question of trust, right? I know fully well that if I'm turning down a deal that he's very excited about, it's because I fundamentally believe it's the not right for us, or we are not the right investor for this company, or it may not be a good opportunity. And if I don't speak the truth, then I'm letting my partner down.
Yeah.
Right. So we can argue, we can debate, whatever, but the truth, and we make sure that everybody in the team has the opportunity to speak the truth. Obviously, voting is only with the partners, but that's the culture we've kept.
Truly amazing. I think one of the things, and I'm probably going to be the pesterer now because it's time for me to also learn how to bring on a partner.
I'll be getting you onto my podcast for that.
No, I think it truly has been such an enlightening episode. It's because it's very rare, I would say, to have someone who's literally seen so many different facets of life across the world, across multiple venture ecosystems, been part of the US venture ecosystem at a very personal level. Obviously, had bore the brunt of it, right? To have $1 million mortgage and then to get laid off, it's obviously the scariest thing. And you've done this 3 or 4 times in life. I can
Not
almost
the $1 million mortgage, but I mean, yeah, but going broke, yes.
Going broke multiple times. That's what I meant. Like, you've done that, and it truly is testament that the way you back your founders and the way you're thinking about it is a collection of all these experiences you've had. And I just love the way you just talked about how to find a partner. It's not just a venture capital fund partner, which I think, and like you correctly said, is very, very important, because it's not just about your money anymore. It's about third party capital, and you cannot bring in a wrong partner because you're managing other people's money, other people's aspirations with that money.
And if you think about what LPs are, wherever they are from, generally they're at a stage where they're not doing this to get a return so they can buy a new car or take a new vacation. They're buying it because this is really part of their legacy, and it's the good they want to do, maybe build a new school or build a new hospital or something like that. So that's always, I would say, this is a day where you have this is a job where you have more frustrations than thing. When the day starts, I look at my WhatsApp. If I have good news, I'm actually very unhappy because I know some bad news is coming during the day. It's better to go back to sleep. But if the day starts with bad news, it's like, okay, something good is going to happen today, right? So it's kind of one of those businesses. But the long-term motivation is that whatever we are doing is going to hopefully make the world a better place for a large number of people. The hard work that we're doing, my plumber's daughter got a scholarship at one of the top universities in the US to do a PhD in computer science.
Wow.
I won't name them, but they're also an LP of ours. And I looked and said, you know what? We slog, we give them great returns. They're able to afford another fellowship, and it's going to come back to someone else in India potentially. Okay, that gives meaning to what we're doing.
It's a
Right? More
entire
than anything, complete circle there, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that, saying, well, ultimately, what is really happening at some point, we will all be fortunate enough, some sooner than others, to be in a situation where we're not doing this just for pure financial outcomes for ourselves, right? But the impact it's going to have is just phenomenal. And now we look at saying, how many high-end jobs are we creating in India? How many people's lives are we changing? I look at a company like MyGate, for example. Yeah, it caters to gated communities and this thing, but it does so much for digitizing the hire by cook driver segment. They used to all be searched before they leave the community. Now we just tell that I've given 500 rupees to them, and the gate guard allows them to be right. So you can't quantify the impact of some of those things and the respect it brings for people there. We look at companies like WheelsEye in our portfolio, digitized, whatever, several million trucks on the platform. And, there were two founders who came to us, with their dreams, and we fortunately, felt aligned with them, and we had the privilege of backing them. They're building a ginormous company here in India. Nobody's even heard of this company, right? It's got stickers at the back of trucks, and everybody thinks it's koi sticker hai, right? But all those trucks are actually on their platform and running well. So we have all these opportunities to meet these founders, whether it is Metafin doing rooftop solar for atta chakkis in Uttar Pradesh. The impact of going from diesel to solar.
Yeah.
People are say, okay, अब मैं ₹7 per kilo से ₹5 में बेचता हूँ, right? They're passing on immediately the savings to their customers, right? They're able to educate their kids. They're able to do so much more with it. And it's, of course, going from diesel to solar. So it's actually environmentally very good.
Absolutely.
These are some privileges. I never thought I was getting into all this stuff when we started. But when you see these options, and we may even make a lot of money doing so, which part of this is the or dozy that is saving lives? Mudit sent me his uncle got admitted to hospital for something, and he went to the bed and there was a dozy device there, and he takes a photo and sends it to his nephew. Right? Those are moments where you can't even quantify the financial outcomes of these things, right? That's the opportunity we're excited about.
And I think that's where I think venture funds like yours, and it's a philosophy. Let's say that even I follow is that when I don't look at impact purely as saying, hey, let's think of impact first and the financial returns later. I think you think of the financial return not because it's money, because it has to sustain itself.
Yes.
And be valuable to the end customer because it's solving a real human problem.
Yep.
And therefore, it creates that massive impact which is sustainable and will grow much faster.
Absolutely.
Because if profitability is not at the thought and core of it, then you will build something that is subpar, is what I feel, right? And I think you've encapsulated that or articulated that much better than I have. I think it truly is amazing that there is a fund like yours in India with someone with such amount of experience in the ecosystem. You've had the good, bad, the ugly, right? But you're really doing what's the best.
And we have to get rich.
Yeah, and we have to get rich, which is slowly. I was going to ask you the one of the last questions I had, but you've already answered that. Is when the final chapter on Indian venture history is written, what would you want the footnote under Sanjay Swamy to say?
There's never going to be a final chapter about Indian venture. Indians have been entrepreneurial all along. I think venture capital is sort of a new asset class that has helped. There's a lot written about venture capital, but ultimately some businesses can only be built in a minute window of time. And so I think venture and entrepreneurship will evolve a lot in India and will continue to be there. I think for us, we run our fund on 3 principles, right? Common sense, which is not very common, integrity and transparency, right? That's basically it. And I think these cultural things that we do, we would love to see more and more startups also function the same way.
Yeah.
Good news takes the staircase, bad news takes the elevator.
Yeah.
Just be open and transparent and, communication. Shailendra at Sequoia Now Peak says, nothing is as good as it appears, nothing is as bad as it appears. I've had a lot of these one-liners that people have told me that have stuck with me, right? Naveen Chadda at Mayfield, who was our first anchor LP in the first fund, said, good companies never die of starvation, Sanjay, but they will die of indigestion. So, things like that. I think, some of this is just common sense and first principle stuff, right? Yes, there will always be opportunities to do something irrational and you might luck out. But this is not a game we are playing to get lucky. We're happy to take our time. And I think being able to consistently deliver top decile, hopefully, and certainly top quartile outcomes to our investors who can plan on us being sort of a vehicle for continuous returns. While founders say, look, these guys do everything in their power to try to make us successful, there is nothing they will stop at. Call me at 3 a.m., I'll get up and I'll pull the whole team if there's an emergency. So founders who believe in that, and a team that says, look, this is sustainable and as long-term thing. I think these are 3 big things we are hoping to achieve out of it. And I think the outcomes will take care of themselves.
Sanjay, I think I could literally, and if I can, would have kept you for another couple of hours. but I think the we have to do another podcast with you in the future. However, as is tradition at the Damani Talks, we always end our podcast with a rapid fire round.
Oh no, don't ask me favorite book. Avoid that question. Okay. I'm not a book guy. Yeah.
Okay, I'll avoid that one has to go.
My favorite book is whatever Amit Somani tells me. He is the book guy.
But I must really say before I get into this that it's been an enlightening episode, and I'm so glad. I think the way this whole interview also, or this podcast got together was, I think you saw a podcast that I
Yes,
had
with
done, and
Pearl.
then with Pearl, right? And that led to Varun writing me an email, in which case we've been trying to get our times together, and in between I got
But I
Varun.
told Varun I want to invite him on our podcast. So we'll return
I
the
think I
favor
misread
soon.
the email saying, "Hey," but it really is. I'm so glad that we've had a chance to meet, and I'm really looking forward to getting some more nuggets of insight outside of this conversation, because as we're probably about at least 8 years behind your journey at the moment in terms of venture. But some of the incredible things you've done is really setting the stage and the foundation for what should be India's decade also for venture capital funds. We've gone through our cycles, and I think we're maturing as an ecosystem fairly quickly. But we're going to require at least 10 homegrown large VC funds. When I'm saying large, I'm not talking about like the size, but the impact that these guys do. And I really hope that Prime obviously is one of them, and that we can learn from that experience and make one ourselves.
Thank you so much. I think you're being very generous with the compliments, but I think we just want to focus on what we're doing, do it well, and very happy to share all our learnings.
Wonderful.
This is not a zero-sum game. This is not a winner takes all. I think it's an opportunity to build a country here and to accelerate the GDP of the country and everybody's benefit. So that's the opportunity here. Thank you for being such a generous host as well.
Thank you, Sanjay. So, do you want to take a break before we get into rapid fire? Are you ready?
I'm good.
Okay, cool.
I don't know what the questions are.
Yeah, well, that's the part that you don't get. But so I'll tell you the rules.
The
are
answer
very
is 3. What's the question?
The rules are very simple, right? I'll ask a question, whatever first comes to mind. The intent could be that we might find something interesting to segue into, but it's just fun, light banter. So if you're ready, let's go. First question: what's the first thing you touch when you wake up?
My cell phone.
Yes.
Not even my specs.
And if
Bad
not,
habit, by the way, but that's the fact.
Yeah. If not for VC, what would you be doing?
I am an entrepreneur even now. I don't see myself as a VC. So I would be an entrepreneur.
One app you're completely obsessed with at the moment.
I hate to say WhatsApp, but yeah.
That's the one that you're using the most. Okay.
Well, I will say lovable, though it's not an app per se. I have always seen myself as a developer who could never get Hello World to compile. But now I've built web pages and websites and stuff like web apps. So that's probably the one I'm obsessed
lovable.
about now. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. The biggest red flag you see in a pitch?
Exit strategy.
As a slide?
Yes.
Okay.
As an entrepreneur, I want you to be doing this. I want you to believe that things are going to go so great that you're going to do this for the rest of your life, right? Yes, I will figure out later on if things are not going well. You and I will sit down and we'll talk about how we should get some value out of it, at least for you, even if it's not material for us. But I don't want you at the early stage thinking about how you're going to sell the company. That's the biggest turnoff.
So you don't like those people say, "Hey, I'm going to be the next unicorn for XYZ, or I'll build you this unicorn, or I'll make you this 100% IRR."
Yeah, don't worry about me. I'll take care of myself. You just build a great company. Let's both focus on can we work together to build a great company,
Yep.
which where you're in the driver's seat and I'm somewhere in the car. I'm not at the gas station, ready for the next refuel. So, but, I hope you're trying to keep driving this.
One entrepreneur you admire?
I still have to say, I don't know about entrepreneur, but I think Satya Nadella, right? There's something else what he has done, right? I don't think anybody, he will go down as the greatest CEO of all time in my mind. Yes, this is a company that was large, right? $200 billion valuation company, and to take it to $3 trillion after 15 years of stagnation, right? Something else.
Yeah. And completely repositioning what looked like a old war horse into what it is today. What was more fun, being a founder or being an investor?
I'm a founder, even as an investor. I think definitely as you evolve in time, right? I think being an investor gives you so much more breadth of exposure. Every Monday morning, right? Somebody's going to walk into your office and say, I'm going to change this amazing large industry, right? And I'm 22 years old, right? So that part is a lot of fun here, for sure.
And let's see, my last question is that 3 words that you would use to describe the Indian startup ecosystem?
Early, monster opportunity as one word or one phrase. The best is yet to come.
Wonderful. Well, Sanjay, this has really been far more than a conversation, to be fair. This has been a masterclass, right? I've just stood here. I've tried to keep myself at about 5% of the conversation and just wanted to absorb and learn. And I believe that when there are listeners, the viewers, really have learned what it took to build a venture ecosystem, what it took to build the digital ecosystem in India, and what it really takes to build a fantastic investor, right? Because I think the elements of failure and the ability to digest failure, to deal with failure, to experience failure really are important lessons to tell to a founder as well, right? And when you haven't done it yourself, it's very difficult to tell a founder, hey, and again, my personal feeling, because I've been in your situation a couple of times in life. Yes, I did have a much more storied background, but I have been down as three founders down to $1,000 in our bank account, and we have a rent bill to pay of $7,000. No idea how we're going to pay it. We just wrote a check and we said, I hope he doesn't deposit it tomorrow. But to be able to say that to a founder from a level of saying, I have done it too,
Yeah.
right, is so important. And more people like yourself are needed in our ecosystem, guiding the founders with real experiences of being founders themselves. So thank you so much for being here. I hope in the next year or so I can have you back once again. Once obviously Fund 5 starts deploying, we'll have more stories. But any final thoughts you had for our audience?
Yeah, I think something you said at the very end, right? I think we have seen in the last 3 years several companies, as the market turned, being forced to restructure themselves to get to default alive,
Yeah.
right? And at every point in time, we see founders, about 3 years ago, it was quite intimidating. But I would say now in our portfolio, we've seen probably 4 to 5 times companies that have completely reset and, move forward and get to the other side, right? And now, while I don't wish this on founders, it's actually really good character building for the company because they come back and do a cleanup.
Yeah.
They may have gotten lucky a bit. And I think any founder who's listening to this and has gotten this far in the thing, if you're having tough times, it's not a good thing, but it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right. And there is a way out. And I think for all founders, almost always, have to keep questioning your assumptions. But don't be disheartened if things are not going great. Step back to the drawing board, take a blank sheet of paper, see what you really stand for. And if there is value to be created still, and if your customers really love you, I think you're willing to do the hard 6 to 18 months, there is light at the end of the tunnel, right? And I think that's something that I used to preach. Now I believe it because I've seen it multiple times now, and companies come out that much stronger.
Yep.
So I think that's the only message I have. And we are staying, as I said, monster opportunity ahead of us. Best is yet to come. And thank you for having me on the show.
Sanjay, this truly has been not just a conversation, it's been a masterclass. Thank you so much for sharing so openly. And thank you so much for letting us know what it takes really to build a venture capital ecosystem in India, a venture capital ecosystem in a fund in India. And most importantly, I think we must thank you for literally changing the lives of 1.4 billion people and to really create the base on which we can set up the next, or what I would call, Indian venture capital 2.0 in India. Thank you so much once again for being on the show. And to all our listeners, stay curious, stay bold.